All right, it's 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Ashley, if you could note that Mark Shody is absent and Jill Marine is absent, but all other members are present. With that, it's our Truth and Taxation hearing, and so I'll turn it over to Lori Vols.
Okay, we'll get the PowerPoint up here. There we go. Okay, so just to kind of review the requirements. The things that we have to go over at our Truth and Taxation hearing is the current year budget, the prior year actual revenue and expenses, the proposed property tax levy, and then specific purposes and reasons for which the taxes are being increased. And at the end, we allow for public comments by requirement. And so that just summarizes what I just said. One point to make out regarding public education Minnesota. We're known for our strong ACT results compared to other states that use that exam. So some data and stats are listed here on that slide. And then also just a summary of public schools established by the Minnesota Constitution. It's the duty of the legislature to establish a general and uniform system of public schools, and that's what drives all that we do. School funding is highly regulated by the state. The state sets the formulas which determine the revenue, and most of our revenues are driven by the state formula. We are funded by the number of students we serve, so of course that's an also important factor. And the state authorizes the school board to consider operating referendums. In our situation, of the $724 per pupil that's allowed regarding two factors, a $300 for a board referendum versus a $424 per student in what's called local optional revenue. For our district here, we have opted for the $424 to be part of the local optional revenue. The $300 board referendum, our board did not act on that. That particular piece came into play right when we were going for our operating referendum renewal. So the board members, in place at the time, I recall that we decided to take the entire vote to the public rather than implementing that $300 for the board referendum. So our district just utilizes the $424 in local optional revenue regarding that piece. Just another thing to be aware of is that regarding inflation, regarding how the state set the formula for FY16 and FY17, and they did give us an increase of 2% a year, but even with that increase, we are still lagging behind inflation. We would have had to have another increase of a 9% in the state formula to keep pace with inflation. So just kind of a comparative, this graph shows that. The red line means what the formula would have been if it was changed to align and keep pace with inflation, would have been at the 6,617 versus where the formula allowance is now. And so it just kind of gives you a visual of where we've been and where we're at now regarding inflation. Another piece that impacts the formulas and our finances is special ed costs. And special ed funding is underfunded. It's at 40% underfunded on average. One thing the legislature did do in the last biennium, they did increase the special ed funding, which definitely did help us out. So it did reduce the need to subsidize special ed from the general fund. See, what happens when they don't fully fund special ed, the general ed formula has to subsidize those costs because we're not getting our full funding. And so just to give you a reference point, the last time the state ran the full calc, they will be running it again, but in 14-15 fiscal year, the cross-subsidy of general ed funding to subsidize special ed expenses above and beyond what the special ed aid calced is $3.5 million. So just gives you an idea how the formula for special ed aid does not fully fund special ed.
So we have to take $3.5 million from our general education dollars that are supposed to be used for regular classroom teachers and regular education funding to cover the shortfall for special education.
That is correct. Okay, and here's another interesting piece that just over the years, how an operating referendum has been so important to public education in general in the state of Minnesota. Back in 92-93, 65% of districts had an operating referendum. And now in 16-17, all 331 districts in the state of Minnesota have an operating referendum. And also to give a comparative, the state average for an operating referendum is $1,262 per pupil. And we are currently at, including the local optional revenue piece, we're at $1,215 per pupil. So we are below the state average, just as a side note. And just to clarify how I mentioned before how the state legislature sets the formulas, and they also determine on a formula what the aid versus local levy split is. And so sometimes if the formula changes regarding that split, like if school taxes go up due to a formula change does not necessarily mean that we are increasing our revenue. It may be just a shift between local aid, local and local levy. I mean state aid and local levy. Okay, just a quick summary on how school district cycles for levy differ from city and county. City and county, their budget year is the same as a calendar year, whereas school district fiscal year begins July 1st and goes through June 30th. So, for example, the property taxes that are 2016 paid, 2017 taxes, they are the part of the revenue for the upcoming fiscal year, which is the 17-18 school year. And just as a side note, our budget is approved June for the upcoming school year, and then we have budget amendments throughout the year. Budget information, we have 8 funds, general fund being our main fund where our general educational expenses are and operations, and you can see listed the other funds that are encompassed in our books. This chart you may have recognized if you notice it in the paper. It's a budget publication report that we are required to publish every year. On the left side of the chart has our final audited information, and we had our audit report just approved at our last board meeting, so you've seen these numbers. And then the right reflects our original budget that was approved in June for the 16-17 year. And I will be bringing an update on the current year budget to the board for approval, possibly in January, if not for sure February. Just to summarize our funds, this pie graph shows our revenue categories of the different funds. So our grand total budget in the school district of revenue is $50 million. Our general fund is the largest fund at $43 million, and this is based on our original budget. Then as far as the general fund itself, this is a breakdown of how our revenue splits out by type of category. So state aid is 84% of our entire general fund. Local taxes are just 11% of our total revenues, and federal aid at 3%. Then this pie graph reflects the type of expenses that we have. You'll see in the bottom left in the red, special ed. You can see how big of a pie that is, chunk of the pie graph. Regular ed is in the yellow, and instructional, vocational is in a green tone. So those 3 categories are the main instructional expenditures that we have. This graph here breaks it down by type of expense, such as object code, what we called in UFAR's object code. So you'll see the big blue part of the graph and the red. Those two together, they signify our staffing costs, salaries and benefits. We're a service organization. This is very typical. Most districts have about 82% of their total budget in salary and benefits, and that is the case for us. Then looking at our proposed levy, this is the process we go through is reviewing our levy. A document like this is prepared by our local county auditor treasurer's office, and it informs the property owner of the proposed taxes broken down by county, city, and school district. And so notices similar to that are being processed now or have already been sent out, I believe. Okay, this graph shows a timeline of how the process for setting the taxes are set, and it all depends on, like, step 2, what the legislature determined. County auditor calculates tax capacity, which also part of the formula. You can see the flow goes down through Minnesota Department of Education, calculating the levy limits, and then now we're at the point in yellow there where the school board is reviewing the levy, and then through the public hearing, and then also adopting the final levy. This shows some dates. So on September 19th, for example, our school board approved the proposed levy amounts, and then mid-November, that's when the county mails the proposed property tax statements, as I mentioned earlier, and had that chart up there, to all property owners. And then tonight is our truth and taxation hearing, and following the hearing, the board will certify the final levy amounts. For our levy this year, the property tax increase is $271,150, or 3.6%. And this chart gives an overall summary of, of the levy. And of the grand total increase of $271,000, the majority increase is in the general fund, which you'll see kind of on the upper part of that chart. The category in yellow is our proposed final levy for 2016 pay 2017. And of the general fund portion, that increased $247,000. And I will hit some highlights of certain categories where the increase is higher than some others. So in the one of the areas was the operating referendum, and that went up, is going up $113,000. There's 2 reasons for that. Enrollment is projected to increase, and also our operating referendum that was passed includes the annual inflationary adjustment. And so those 2 factors come into play of why the referendum went up. Then operating capital is another area that we saw an adjustment. Now this area, there was a decrease of $91,000. And one thing to point out here is that even though the local levy went down in this particular category, that was offset by an increase in state aid. So the formula just redetermined how the total revenue was split between state aid and local levy in this particular category. And I also want to point out that the change in this operating capital levy is made partially to offset an increase in the long-term facility maintenance levy, which is new. So I'll explain that shortly. Okay, and here we are. Long-term facility maintenance increased $176,000. And there's a couple things I want to point out about this particular revenue stream. It is newer. It replaces the previous health and safety, deferred maintenance, and alternative facility programs. And just another thing to point out is that for the long-term facility maintenance, how the formula is set up on this category is that 49% of the funding is through property taxes and 51% through state aid. So that's how that formula is drawn up in this category. The instructional lease levy in this category is going up $112,000. And there are a couple areas that are involved in this increase. The levy for the new cooperative building with the Austin Albert Lee Area Special Ed Co-op, that was a new levy, lease levy of $81,405. So that's the bulk of it. But we also saw an increase in our lease at Riverland for the ALC program because our square footage increased. And so that was an increase of $12,600. And then the city lease for the arena, they had a variety of additional expenses there, such things as a bleacher upgrade and so forth. So that was an increase of $18,400. Then another area where we had a decrease were adjustments for prior years. There's a variety of areas that came into play here, and this is a decrease of $69,000. So there's a variety of things that can cause the tax bill for an individual property owner to increase or decrease from year to year, and changes in the value of the individual property will definitely come into play, as well as changes in the total value of all property in the school district. So those, and of course, then you have also changes in formula amounts that come into play as well. One thing I want to show you, for you here. What's that? Okay. This is an interesting chart because it shows comparison of changes over the years, and it shows the tax impact of the levy for different property values. And so usually I like to point out a residential homestead of a $100,000 home, use that for an example. And for example, on taxes payable in 2017, compared to 2014, for a $100,000 home, taxes in 2017 are going down by $1 compared to where the taxes were back in 2014. Now, if you compare the taxes for 2017 compared to last year in 2016 for a $100,000 home, that did go up by $22. So what this is telling you is that our taxes had gone down for a number of years, and now we have a little bit of increase, but overall we're still down compared to what we were back in 2014. That's basically the main gist of this graph. This chart just shows it more visually. You can see on the upper right for a $100,000 residential homestead property. In 2014, it was $405, and the estimated 2017 is $404. And there is some information on tax refunds that certain people may be eligible for, so I include that in the chart here. There's different types of refunds. So that's the end of the Truth and Taxation presentation. So at this point, it's open for any public comments or questions.
Thank you. I have our proposed tax bill in front of me. Now, we live on South Broadway, a block outside of city limits, obviously retired, no kids in school. Our taxes went up almost $500. We had our place on the market from June 1 to November 15th for the same amount, actually less than what they've got our value at. We couldn't even get an offer. They've got us valued at $139,800. We were down to $133,500. So I don't know where this is coming from, but it chokes, absolutely chokes retirees. Now, last week on TV, we hear about all the excess money the state of Minnesota has in their treasury. So where are our people that are representing us? Why isn't some of this money coming back into the school system? It's sitting there drawing interest, who knows? They'll find a use for it, but it won't be the schools. The schools are always the last. They'll cut the programs before they'll do anything about funding the programs. So here comes the taxpayers to bear the burden. And I just can't see this. I can't see how it can be justified to raise our value $20,000 in 1 year when we can't even sell it. We can't even get a contract for deed offer on it. You know, I hate to be in a position where we're forced to walk away from it. You know, we worked long and hard to buy a place, own a place, get our our credit rating where it's comfortable, and then we come along with this. And I work part-time because of things like this. We can't afford it on Social Security alone. So what can we do to get this bill down? So I'm open for answers.
Question that I had for you, have you contacted the county assessor's office that does that valuation?
No, we were not able to come to the meeting last week,
Okay,
which, that's where the big chunk is.
yep, and they determine that valuation for your
I am-
property? So
I am
you-
going to be writing a letter to them to see if
Yeah.
I can't get them out there. I don't even know who does the assessing. It used to be George Rothmeyer, I thought. And we know George. We put in a new well 2 years ago because the realtor said it'd be easier to sell than a shared well. Well, we saw what happened there. I just don't know where they're coming from in an assessment to get to this number.
Yep.
And I don't know where to begin.
Yep, I would encourage you to contact the assessor's office and have a conversation with them about how they've arrived at that valuation for your property. I think that's a good place to start.
Now, if we can get this reduced somewhat, will this automatically change the school numbers also, the tax?
If yours is changed, it should change the tax on.
It just follows down the line then?
Correct.
Now, would it, like, if we call them tomorrow and they come out, is it too late to get something done for the 2017 taxes?
I don't think so, because I think you're taxed based upon the value of your property. So if they reassess the value of the property, the tax would adjust from there.
I can't hear you.
I think you're within the time frame right now that they have the ability to come out and reassess your property. You know, one of the
Okay.
things that you'll have to make sure that you mention is that how long you had it on the market and the fact that you didn't even get an offer at the, at the
Yeah, it
asking
was
price. So
listed
you're
with
$20,000 difference just right there, so.
Yeah, we
And I
had
don't know if
it
that'll help, but
listed with Coldwell Bankers, and there was enough showings. And the one comment that came from the lookers was it was too high priced. And it's an acre and a third. It's a little bit of room out there.
Back to your comment about the state, and this slide says it all right here. Okay, in 1992, 65% of the districts had a referendum of about $300 per student. And here we are, 20-some years later, all the districts in the state have a referendum at $1,200. So the state completely is underfunding education, and that's why local taxpayers get upset, because they're putting more and more of the burden on the local folks.
Right, and I don't have a problem with funding the schools. Education is important. My problem is where the money's coming from. I was not a resident of Minnesota when Jesse Ventura was our governor here. I just hear tales of it, and how refund checks went out because there was an excess. What's different now? So, yeah, we're really frustrated over this. And now to get a hold of this, we'd call this 377-5121 number then? And then request, and if they need it in writing, I'll do it in writing.
George Rothmeyer is still there, so I'll ask for George.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, he's my stepdaughter's ex-father-in-law.
Oh,
But I don't think he'll penalize us for that.
yeah, you might want to ask for Ryan.
All right, we'll give him a call and see what can be done and go from there. All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Do you want me to shut this off?
All right, any other questions from the board at all about the truth and taxation information from Lori?
A question. You said the special ed funding was improved. What amount of difference did that make for our district, if you happen to know ballpark?
As far as the grand total, I'd have to get back to you. I don't have that amount off the top of my head.
Okay, and Ashley, did you get that Jill joined us? Okay, thank you. All right, then we are finished with that, and we will move on to our other agenda before us this evening. Again, all members are present with the exception of Mark Schody, who's not here this evening. So our first action item is we need approval of tonight's agenda. A second? Second. All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And under action items 3.1, we have approval of the 2016 pay 2017 final levy, and that is an action item. Presenter Lori Voles.
Madam Chairman, members of the board, Dr. Funk, for your consideration would be approving the final 2016 pay 2017 levy as presented. And just to summarize, it reflects a 3.59% increase in levy overall, as illustrated there on the screen.
Okay, I need a motion. A second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. And motion carries. With that, we are adjourned.